Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of the podcast. We've got a pretty fun episode planned here. The NBA trade deadline is in, I think an hour as of when we're recording this, so we might have some live reactions to some pretty interesting trades, and we will talk about a lot of the moves that have gone on within the last 24 hours. We're also going to be giving our Super Bowl predictions, going to be reacting to all the front office moves made within the last couple of weeks. We'll be talking about running backs and receivers in this year's upcoming draft class. And then we've also got our predictions for the AL Central and West. We're doing two divisions as we want to make sure that we'll have enough time to get all of them in. So, as always, I'm joined by Nick Nader, if you'd like to say hi to everyone.
Kellen Moore is going to win Assistant Coach of the Year in 2024. Mark my words.
Yeah, he might win the Assistant Coach of the Year in the state of Pennsylvania specifically. All right, let's not waste any time, and let's start with talking a little bit about the upcoming Super Bowl matchup. Before we get into this first part, I do want to point out that obviously this is being uploaded quite a bit after the Super Bowl, and we had already uploaded a video with our Super Bowl predictions, but I figured I would keep this part in the video just so you guys could see how our predictions aged, to see if we were right or laughably wrong. So Super Bowl 58 is in 3 days from now, probably 2 by the time this is uploaded. And of course, our matchup, as everybody knows and everybody seems to be pretty depressed over, is the Chiefs and the 49ers. So I guess we could start by talking about the conference championship games, because that's kind of where we last were during the previous episode of the show, in which the Chiefs beat the Ravens pretty handedly, and then the Niners came back down 24-7 to beat the Lions in the NFC game. So I'll talk about the AFC one briefly, because there's not a whole lot to go over there other than that the Chiefs were the better team. They absolutely deserve to win. Their defense played really well and has been great throughout the entire playoffs. And I'm curious to see how they're able to hold up against a Niners offense who has plenty of playmakers. The other game was certainly a lot more interesting, and I still have not gotten over it a week and a half later. Everyone wants to blame Dan Campbell for the loss and his aggressive play calling on fourth down, and I personally think that's pretty dumb. I don't think it's his fault at all. Of the 3 tough fourth down decisions that he had to make, I thought at the time 2 of them were the right call. The only one that I disagreed with was the one in the third quarter right before the big catch by Ayuk. And on that play, the play call itself was really good, and the ball just went right through Josh Reynolds' hands. If he catches a pretty open pass, that goes for a first down, and we're not having this conversation. So I think ahead of Dan Campbell, there needs to be blame for Josh Reynolds, who dropped 2 passes. Jahmyr Gibbs had the fumble. The defense was abysmal in the second half. Even Jamison Williams dropped a touchdown, although I don't want to get on him. He had probably the best game of his NFL career. And even the play calling from both of the coordinators was also a little bit suspect. I think all those guys deserve blame over Dan Campbell, and I like that he stuck to his principles. And I think, again, for the most part, they weren't really that bad of calls. It's just that they didn't really work out. And if he had decided to call a completely different game than normal throughout the year, I would argue that would be a bigger concern, because he would be scared at the big moment, and he showed that he isn't. And hopefully that's a sign of things to come. The team should be back consistently over the next few years, but it's the NFL. You never know. And that's probably the worst part about the loss, is the mystery of if this core is ever going to get back here.
Yeah, we've seen countless teams go to a conference championship, and will they want to get back? We've seen the Jags in 2017, the Vikings 2017, and so many other teams that are like, oh, we're young, we have the talent, we're going to get back there, and they just don't do it. I think the Lions could break that mold and actually become a really consistent playoff team, especially under Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, and all the skill position players. The defense is getting better and better as the years goes by. Ben Johnson is sticking around. He's not going to get a head coaching job, not just yet. So you'll have another year with Ben Johnson, who is one of the better offensive coordinators in the league. And the team's young enough to where they now have that playoff experience. The QB already has experience now. All the rest of the players have that experience in the big moments. Let's go see them take one more year, win the division. Maybe we'll get a 1 seed and just roll down, try to get a Super Bowl. I think they can do it. It's a matter of if they can kind of keep what they did this year and push it into next year. And then for the Chiefs Ravens, it was a very defensive game. Obviously, 2 of the best defenses in the league. Big props to Mac McDonald. He did a phenomenal job for the Ravens defense, especially in the second half. I don't think the Chiefs scored once in the second half. Maybe they got like a field goal. But besides that, yeah, no, they didn't score in the second half at all. They were down 10 going into half. Chiefs did not score once. It was up to Lamar, go get a touchdown, maybe two, win the game for your team. And he just couldn't do it. He had opportunities. You can blame a bit on Zay Flowers for the fumble at the goal line. That would have turned the tables. If he scores there, by the game, they go to overtime. But the offense just couldn't do it. The Chiefs defense stood their ground. McDuffie, Snead, Nick Bolton has been healthy for the playoffs. He played back in the Bills game. He was great in the Ravens game. Chris Jones is a monster. That defense is going to have a really tough job going into the Super Bowl, but I think they have been phenomenal all year. And when the Niners are struggling against the Packers defense, and for the first half of the Lions game, they were struggling, well, who's to say they're going to be able to beat the Chiefs defense?
So now that brings us into Super Bowl 58 between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers, a rematch from the game 4 years ago that ended up being a pretty fun one. Both of these rosters look quite a bit different, but they've been able to maintain most of their cores over the last 4 years. So now it's time for us to give a prediction, and I will go first. I feel weirdly confident about this one, and it's a little bit weird because going into the playoffs, I had the Niners winning the Super Bowl. I felt like they were the best team, head to toe, in the league, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs really just have not been all that good throughout the duration of the regular season, or at least not all that good for their standards. But Kansas City's won me over this playoff run. I'm picking the Chiefs to win, and that's because really their defense has been unbelievable for much of the year. Everyone wants to give the attention to their offense and Mahomes, and I get it. Their offense is great. But that defense with Steve Spagnuolo, who's one of the more underrated coaches in the NFL, I think they could give the Niners a little bit of trouble. They've got talent up front. They've got good linebackers. They've got a strong secondary. Probably the best cornerback duo in the entire league with McDuffie and Snead. And I think all of those young guys being able to produce has been so key for them, as much as it has been for Mahomes producing and Travis Kelce playing really well throughout the playoffs and them running the ball well with Isaiah Pacheco. The Chiefs are so well coached for such a young team. They have peaked at the right time. I understand why the Niners are the favorite. They have been by far the better team throughout the year. But Kansas City's won me over. I'm picking the Chiefs to win the game. Mahomes is going to be my Super Bowl MVP because that just feels like the easy pick. But if I were to go off the rails a little bit and pick somebody on defense, I think the X factor here could be Nick Bolton, the linebacker. He had some big plays last year in the Super Bowl, missed some time this year with an injury, but is one of the best linebackers in the league. And obviously, when you look at the linebackers in this game, you look at the San Francisco duo with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, and understandably so. Those guys are ridiculous. But Nick Bolton is also really good. I think we could have quite the game from him.
I was really hoping you wouldn't go that route because that's the exact route I was gonna go. As I was saying, I think the Niners have not really performed all that well. They've had 3 good quarters of football in the past 2 games. In the fourth quarter against the Packers and the second half against the Lions. For the majority of those games, they were not looking all that well. The first half against the Lions game, they did not look good. First half and even the third quarter of the Packers game, they did not look good. It looked like the Packers could have legitimately won that game with a better 2-minute drill from Jordan Love or a made field goal. The Niners wouldn't have won that game. We would see a Packers-Lions conference championship. They probably shouldn't have been able to win that Lions game, but they did, and they're here. And the Niners have been, obviously, one of the better teams in football. They're here. They made it. They deserve it. But the Chiefs in the playoffs have been the best team. Their defense has been the best defense in the league for a few weeks now. Steve Spagnuolo's been a phenomenal job getting all the young guys there. You've seen guys like George Karlaftis kind of come out of nowhere and been really good. They have, like you said, the best corner duo with McDuffie and Snead. Justin Reed's a great safety. Nick Bolton and Willie Gay is one of the best young linebacker duos. Chris Jones is a monster. And on the offensive side, Pacheco and Travis Kelce have kind of picked up their play and have been really good. Rashee Rice has been a very reliable slot receiver kind of guy. He had almost 1,000 yards. I thought he didn't do all that great, but he had over 900 yards. He had a really good rookie season. And I think if the offense can tone it down a bit, kind of instead of going with the big plays like they used to with Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, relax, go over the middle a few times, throw some small routes. The guys like Pacheco, Rice, Sky Moore got taken off of injured reserve. I know he's not all that good, but it's another weapon. And Travis Kelce's been great in the playoffs. I think the Chiefs are the hottest team right now. I think they're just playing better than the Niners right now. And if the Niners are struggling against defenses of the Packers and the Lions, I don't see how they're going to be able to get past Steve Spagnuolo. I'm taking the Chiefs. The easy pick for MVP is Mahomes. I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to end up being Trent McDuffie. I don't know why, but he's probably going to get a pick somewhere. Because Brock Purdy, I think, has thrown a pick in at least both the playoff games so far. If not, he just hasn't played out all that great. So I am going to be taking Chiefs. I'm going to pick McDuffie as the MVP, but it'll probably be Mahomes.
Let's also go over the NFL offseason. The last changes of the coaching carousel have been made. I'm not entirely sure where we left off in terms of where all the hiring were, but I know in terms of head coaching stuff, there have been two guys who have been hired since the last episode, and that's with Seattle and Washington, getting Mike Macdonald for the Seahawks and then Dan Quinn for the Commanders. Got to give Seattle credit. I think Mike Macdonald's going to be a home run hire. His name has risen fast up the coaching rankings, and rightfully so. I think him working with that defense is going to be really, really fun. Seattle gave him a 6-year deal. They're clearly committed to him, and I'm really excited for the Seahawks. I think that might be the best hiring of the entire cycle. As for Washington getting Dan Quinn, I don't mind Dan Quinn. I think he's a good coordinator. I don't mind him getting a second chance as a head coach because he wasn't awful his first time around with Atlanta. But the whole Ben Johnson saga with Washington is just confusing me. Can the Commanders just let this go? For the love of God, they have dragged Ben Johnson's name through the mud. It is clear that they wanted him, and understandably so. Ben Johnson is fantastic. But Ben Johnson, after the NFC Championship loss, decided to stay as the coordinator for the Lions, and he made his decision a day or two after we lost that game. It's not like he took 2 weeks. The Commanders were flying up to Detroit to interview him, which I think is why they were partly upset, but they were also interviewing Aaron Glenn as well. It's not like they were only going up there to see Ben Johnson. And again, it's not like he took a week to make his decision. It's not like Washington chose him and he backed out like Josh McDaniels did with Indianapolis a few years ago. So I really don't get the complaints here from Washington. I think they're just trying to make a big deal out of nothing. I guess it doesn't hurt for the Lions. If Ben Johnson's reputation is hurt around the league a little bit, that means it's more likely he's to stick around. But I don't think NFL teams are going to care. Once Ben Johnson wants to be a head coach, he will get to somewhere. So I think Washington's just been kind of childish about this. But I don't think Dan Quinn's an abysmal hire. It's just that going from a defensive retread coach to another one, I don't think this is the right spot for Dan Quinn to really succeed. I think they should have gone for a young offensive mind. I get that Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick were both kind of off the table, but they kind of put their eggs into the Johnson basket hoping it would work out, and it burned them. So it's kind of their own fault. We've had a handful of GMs getting hired around the league. I'm not sure if we talked about the Tom Telesco one a couple weeks ago going to the Raiders. That's one I really don't get at all. He really didn't do a very good job roster building with the Chargers. They have a lot of talent, but they just haven't been able to put it together, and I don't really see what the Raiders saw in him. Most of the other GM hirings are newer guys, first-year general managers, so there's not really a whole lot to say on them other than I'm curious to see if they work out.
Yeah, I feel more or less the same when it comes to Mike Macdonald and Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn just kind of feels like a rehash of Ron Rivera. I think Quinn's a better coach. I mean, Rivera got fired, Dan Quinn got hired, so he should be a better coach. He's also good at kind of getting the defense together. But after the abysmal playoff game against the Packers, I did not think he was going to get a head coaching job, especially after the Seahawks got Mike Macdonald. They were the favorites to get him, and I was like, okay, he's not getting the job. He's staying in Dallas. And the Commanders kind of out of nowhere kind of just got Dan Quinn. And that really surprised me coming out of almost left field for me, where you go from an older defensive guy who has head coaching 10 years before to another older coach who has a defensive mindset and has been a head coach before. He's been in DC for a few years, but you kind of just traded all your good edge rushers, and now you're getting back another defensive coach who is more of a secondary guy, it seems. And you have some secondary pieces. You just got, I can't remember his name right now, but they just took a corner in the first round who did not play all that well.
Manuel
And
Forbes.
he might be able to, thank you, he might be able to fix him a little bit. But it just feels like you're not taking that step forward. And the hires they've been getting for besides head coach have just been guys who have done things in other situations. They got Cliff Kingsbury to be their offensive coordinator, and I think the main reason for that is because they think they have a shot against Caleb Williams. The reports I've seen is that most likely Caleb Williams is a Bear. But the other option is Bears trade down one, get Marvin Harrison probably, and the Commanders go get Caleb Williams. They get the OC that Caleb had in college. That would make the most sense, but if you end up getting Drake May, that's not a bad option with Cliff Kingsbury. Have your coach be defensive guy. Cliff Kingsbury is kind of maybe a better OC, but I'm not too sure. Mike McDonald is a phenomenal head coach. I think it's probably my second favorite hire. I think he's a great defensive mind. I think he's going to be able to bring up this defense, and they have picks to be able to get a lot of those younger guys going. But the one hire that we didn't talk about last time, and you didn't mention, you kind of forgot about, is my man, Dave Canales in Carolina. I think this is my favorite hire. I love Canales. He was the offensive coordinator for Geno Smith last year. He brought his career back, goes to the Bucs, becomes the OC for them, and now Baker Mayfield's career is somewhat revived. And then he leaves to get a head coaching job in Carolina to go and try and help this offense. And I think this is a phenomenal hiring. That you get to keep Ejiro Evero, who was your DC last year, and you had a top 10 defense. So you get to keep him. You're going to probably have a still top 10 looking defense. You have to sign some guys like Brian Burns. Jeremy Chin, I believe, is also a free agent. So you have to sign those two guys. But if you get both of them back, your defense is going to be top 15 bare minimum. And now you get a guy who's basically an offensive guru at this point to help the offense, fix what you have going on with Bryce Young, help the run game, get those young receivers kind of going. A lot of people like Jonathan Mingo coming out of college, and he didn't do a lot. But I think this guy can come in. He can help Bryce become the best version of himself. I think he's going to get Mingo going, and I think they're going to try and go out and get a receiver, whether it's in free agency, whether it's in the draft. They're going to get weapons for Bryce. They're going to fix the O-line. It's going to be a fun time in Carolina. It might take a year or two, but I think they're kind of on the up and up right now.
For whatever reason, I thought we talked about Carolina, but now that I think about it, I believe you're right. So I'll share what I have to say about Canales, and I'm totally with you. I think this is a slam dunk hire by the Panthers, and it's not so much Canales specifically, although I do think he is really good and will succeed with the Panthers, but it's more so that Carolina is in a position where they might have the worst future outlook on paper in the NFL. And things do change quickly in this league. 3 years ago, that's what we said about the Houston Texans, and look at them. They have maybe the best future, if not one of, in the league. But as we look at those Texans teams, they were forced to hire guys like David Culley and Lovie Smith, who nobody really wanted. It's because nobody wanted to take those Texans jobs. And I was concerned for Carolina that would be the case, not just because their roster and their lack of draft capital is an issue, but also because of how hands-on of an approach that owner David Tepper takes. And obviously he has not done that organization well. So I'm really impressed that they were still able to get a premium candidate with Canales, a really talented offensive mind who's really done a good job over the last few years. Last year in Tampa with Baker, the year before in Seattle with Geno. He's worked with Russ. He's worked a lot with Seattle's receivers over the 2010s and is a big part in the development of guys like Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett, and others who weren't necessarily great prospects. I don't even know if Baldwin was drafted off the top of my head, and he ended up having a great career with the Seahawks for close to a decade. So I think Canales is going to be a great hire for Carolina. I'm really happy for them. It seems like David Tepper might be taking a step back, which might be an even bigger win. So I hope for Carolina's sake, and I hope for Bryce Young's sake, that ends up being the case, and their future outlook may not be as bad as we thought it was 2 weeks ago. So with that, we'll shift our attention to the NFL draft, and we're going to go over some of our favorite skill position players in this year's group. In the last episode, we talked about quarterbacks in this year's draft, and today we are moving over to some of our favorite offensive skill position players at running back and wide receiver. I will start, and we will begin with running back, which is an interesting position this year because last season in specific was a special running back class. Two guys going to the top 12 with Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. And so far, albeit it's only 1 year, but both of those players, especially Gibbs, look well worth their draft slot. And as we look at this year's class, there aren't any guys who I think are going to go super high. No one's going to go in the first round. We might get a handful of guys in the second round, but I do think this could end up being a pretty good class. If I had to guess, I think Jonathan Brooks from Texas might be the favorite to be the top running back off the board. He really only has a 1-year sample because he's been behind guys like Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson over the last couple of years. But Brooks has been really solid this year with Texas. Very productive as a runner. He's got good size, 6 foot, 210 pounds. He's somebody who's got good quickness, good athleticism, and good power to him. And I think his well-rounded skill set could lead to him being pretty good. I like Trey Benson a lot out of Florida State. He's a guy I've followed for a while, being that he started his career with Oregon. He's been with the Seminoles over the last couple of years. He's been a pretty good player. For his size at 6'1", 220 pounds, he's a really impressive athlete, and I think teams are really going to like that. He's a big play threat who I think if he improves as a receiver could absolutely be an every down back in the league. There are some medical question marks with him dating back to his career with Oregon, though. And speaking of the Ducks, I think Bucky Irving's going to be one of the best backs out of this class. He's been really good with Oregon over the last couple of years. He's a little bit on the smaller side, 5'10", 195, but another impressive athlete. Really explosive, and he's been really good in the receiving game, and that's largely because Bo Nix has not been afraid to often look for checkdowns and look for his players who he trusts after the catch. But Bucky Irving's been a really good receiving back. I'm curious to see, if that's more of the system or if that's his skill set. I think it's going to end up being a little bit of both, but I think Bucky will be a really solid back in the league. Jalen Wright from Tennessee is a player who I think could be really good. 5'11", but he's built thick, and he's really explosive. Big play threat. Another big play threat who's also a big guy is Audric Estime from Notre Dame, one of the youngest players in the entire draft class. He's going to be 20 when he gets picked, and I think he's going to turn 21 right around when he makes his NFL debut. 5'11", 230. He's built like a rock. He's physical, but he's also a big play machine. Top 10 this year in yards after contact and carries of at least 15 yards. Maybe part of it is that he's always had a great offensive line in Notre Dame, and I think that very well could be the case. But I think Estime is one of the higher ceilings of running backs in this draft. Blake Corum from Michigan's an interesting player. He's an older prospect. He's going to be 24 as a rookie, and maybe, again, he's a product of that Michigan offensive line, but he's been a really good player for them for a while, super high character. And then Braylon Allen is another guy to look out for. Again, super young. He's going to be 20 his entire rookie year. He's got a little bit of work to do, but he's got a really interesting build. 6'2", 245, and he is super athletic at his size. So I think he's a little bit more raw, but some team might want to take a shot on upside. And I'm curious to see if there are any guys on day 3 who really develop. Ray Davis from Kentucky's pretty good. Marshawn Lloyd from USC. Will Shipley from Clemson. A sleeper of mine who people are going to know this name, but I don't think it's gotten enough love is Frank Gore Jr. from Southern Miss. Obviously the son of Frank Gore. Really talented player. Had a great week down at the Shrine Bowl. I think he won the MVP at the game. I think he could end up being a really solid player for probably a 4th or 5th round pick.
Yeah, comparing this class to last year's class is a bit of a question after we saw 2 go in the first round, 1 go in the top 10. But I do think this class is going to be somewhat deep. No, like you said, no one's going to go in the first round. We might have a few here go in the second round, but I think it's really going to start come the 3rd round where we start to see a lot of these running backs go off the board here. And it starts with those big names. Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, you mentioned, is one of the big names here. He's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of strength behind him. One of the probably the bigger backs of this class, and I think he, like you said, he's probably the favorite to go off the board first. I don't know if that's who I would take first, but I think he's going to be probably one of the better backs out of this class. I mean, it's the NFL. Who knows what happens, but I think he's pretty good. I'm with you on the Trey Benson train. I think he's going to be a great back. I think he's got all the tools. He's got all the height, the weight, the athletics. I think you mentioned, he's got to fix the receiving a little bit here and there. But besides that, I think he's going to be a great back. He can do a lot of different things. He was in a very high-powered offense over there at Florida State. I think he's going to be able to do a lot of great things. And depending on the team, I think he's going to be able to do a lot of really good things come into the NFL. I think he's going to be able to be one of the better backs. He'll be able to get out of the backfield, inside, outside, tosses, all of that. I think he's going to be a great back. Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, I think he's another one of my big guys. Almost 6 foot, 210. He's got a lot of abilities for everything. I am blanking on how to describe him. But he was one of the better backs this past year over there at Tennessee. I think he has a lot of the great intangibles. That's the word I was trying to think of. But good receiver, good runner, obviously. You're a running back. You better be a good runner. But I think if he can get to a team with a slightly better O-line, I think he'll be phenomenal grab. I think there's a few guys down the board that I really like. You mentioned Bucky Irving. I think he might go 3rd or 4th round. I think he's pretty good. Bray Davis out of Kentucky. I like him a lot. Braylon Allen, you mentioned one of the more raw prospects. He's going to be 20, I think. He's going to be really young, but I think if you can get him behind a good O-line to start his career, he'll be able to develop faster than he would behind like the Bears O-line or something. So he's going to have, I think, a good career depending on where he ends up. I see Wisconsin. My brain thinks Jonathan Taylor. I don't think he's going to be Jonathan Taylor, but I think he has a lot of good tools for him to where he'll be able to develop really well. And you have Frank Gore Jr. I have one guy, Carson Steele out of UCLA. I don't know what it is. I just have a lot of I think I really like him. 6'1", 225. I think he's going to be one of the better backs. I think he has a lot of power behind him. One of the bigger, one of the stronger backs. He's got a lot of athletic upside. He can catch the ball somewhat. He doesn't have to be super reliable out of the backfield, but he can get you those extra 4 or 5 yards just from catching screen passes or anything like that. I think he could be really good behind a good O-line. A lot of these running backs is going to depend on what line they're behind. Obviously, you prefer to be behind like a Cowboys or Eagles line than like a Bears line or something like that. But this is a very deep class. I think we could see guys who are going 6th, 7th, even undrafted, who are going to be able to make a difference. And there's just a lot of different guys that I think are going to be really good coming out of this class. Maybe not as good as guys like Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs that we just saw, but I think there's going to be a few here and there that are going to be able to make a really big impact year one.
Let's look at the wide receivers now, and unlike the running back class, the receivers have gotten a lot of the press this year, and I think other than QB, receivers probably the most interesting positional group to a lot of people this year, and I understand why. It's a loaded group, and obviously that starts with the top 3. In some order, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze, all of whom I think are going to go in the top 10, all 3 of whom have very differing but unique skill sets. And I think the question that people have, between Nabers and Odunze, who's going to be better? And I personally lean with the upside that Malik Nabers brings to the table. His explosiveness, I think, is really impressive. Knows how to get open, knows how to separate. He's consistently improved every year at LSU. I think Odunze might be a little bit more polished. He has unbelievable body control and was so consistent this year at Washington. But I think the upside that Nabers has makes him worth a top 5 pick. Say Marvin Harrison does go in the top 3. I wouldn't have a problem with Arizona picking Nabers at 4 at all. Some people seem to think Odunze is the better prospect. I would lean Nabers, and I think that's how the league is going to go as well. The next big question is who's going to be wide receiver 4. There's probably close to 10 guys who could be in consideration here, and I personally have not decided who will be my 4th receiver, but there are a number of guys in the discussion. Brian Thomas Jr., the other LSU receiver, I think he led all players in the FBS in receiving touchdowns this year. Big, physical. The question is, will he be able to separate at a high level at the next level? Troy Franklin from Oregon, I've had the pleasure of watching him for 2 years. Absolute burner, really impressive size. And I think for a team like Kansas City or Buffalo, who's looking for somebody who can stretch the field, that's exactly what Troy Franklin brings to the table. Ladd McConkey out of Georgia, the numbers aren't overly impressive, but the kid knows how to get open, and I think he's going to be a really good player in the NFL for a long time. Jalen Polk from Washington, I think, is pretty underrated. Did really well as the wide receiver 2 there this year behind Rome Odunze. And then as we kind of get to that next tier, I think A.D. Mitchell from Texas has a lot of upside, another big physical receiver. His Texas teammate, Xavier Worthy, one of the faster players in the draft. I think he probably goes in the 2nd round. Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Only 6'1", measured in at the Senior Bowl. Everybody kind of thought he was going to be 6'3", but he had a great season for South Carolina. The question with him, though, is he a one-year wonder and a late breakout at 23 years old, or is this potentially sustainable? Ricky Pearsall from Florida, talented player, had a good week at the Senior Bowl. Jalen McMillan, when healthy, he's really good. Roman Wilson from Michigan had a really strong Senior Bowl. Johnny Wilson out of Florida State, super big, super physical. And then his teammate Keon Coleman has a ton of upside, but has some work to do. In terms of Coleman, everybody kind of thinks he's super raw because of the year he had at Florida State, which is true. But he looked even more polished, I would say, in the past at Michigan State. So I don't think you can forget about those Michigan State seasons, especially last year as a sophomore, where he was really impressive. Jamari Thrash from Louisville is a good player. Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. Jermaine Burton from Alabama, consistent hands. Speaking of former Alabama players, I think Javon Baker from UCF could be the sleeper of this group. Didn't necessarily have a great week at the Senior Bowl, but he's got solid size, good production this year at Central Florida. Once a highly touted recruit at, again, I'm pretty sure it was Alabama. Didn't really work out there, but I think he was able to turn around nicely at Central Florida. And then the last player I'll mention is Malik Washington from Virginia. He's small, but he's tough. He had a good week at the Shrine Bowl, and I'm curious to see where he ends up and if he can be a productive player despite the lack of size.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, this is one of the best receiver classes we've seen in a little bit. I think it's extremely top-heavy going into like the second round, and I think a little after day 2 is where it kind of falls off. There might be one or two guys that kind of slip and will be good, but I think really in the first and second round, we're going to see a lot of receivers go, and there are going to be a lot of good ones. And, of course, it starts Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Rome Odunze. Those are the big three. Those guys are almost definitely going in the top 10. All three of those guys are fantastic. Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to go in the top 3, at latest 4. There's no way he gets outside of the top 5. And if Marvin Harrison goes in the top 3, Nabers is almost definitely going to follow him in the top 5. I think Nabers is wide receiver 2. Marvin Harrison is wide receiver 1. It's not even 1 and 2, it's 1A, 1B. Because those two are some of the best receiver prospects we've seen in a hot minute. And by that, I mean 2019, because Jamar Chase exists. Rome Odunze, I'm a tad bit lower on. I don't think he's like terrible. I still think he's worth a top 10 pick. I just think there's a big enough gap between Nabers and Odunze to where there is a conversation, but I do think it will almost always end in Nabers being the better prospect. But I still really like Odunze, and I can see him going in like the late top 10, like the 8, 9, 10 range, and I would be perfectly okay with that. When it comes to wide receiver 4, there's a lot of answers here. Personally, I am a Keon Coleman guy through and through. I love his upside. He is a tad raw, but I think there's so much upside. There's so much athleticism there. He reminds me of guys like T. Higgins, Mike Evans that go up there and get it kind of guys, and you can rely on him to go up there and get it. And I just love what he brings to the table. And I think if he can go to a team early in the second round, maybe late in the first, he can bring some good athleticism to that team. And I saw this thing that Dave Canales, the head coach for the Carolina Panthers, he follows Keon Coleman. He's the only one that does that. He follows no one else, just Keon Coleman. I think that's interesting. And if Bryce Young has a guy like Keon Coleman on the outside, that would be amazing for his development. But besides him, Brian Thompson Jr., he's a great LSU guy. We always look at Malik Nabers as the big LSU guy, but Brian Thompson Jr. is almost definitely going to go in round 1. If he somehow falls, he's not going to last long in the second round. He'll probably be that Carolina Panther pick if he somehow falls. But he's a great prospect. Troy Franklin is a really good slot guy. He's a great deep threat. He reminds me a lot of Devontae Smith. Looking at him lately. And he just has a lot of athleticism, a lot of really good traits. You mentioned you've watched him for a while. He's a great prospect. I think you really like the idea of him going to the Chiefs. That terrifies me because that would be just a great connection there with Franklin and Mahomes, and that would be ridiculous. Ladd McConkey at the Senior Bowl looked really good. He is one of the best route runners probably in this class. And I think during the Senior Bowl, in terms of his route running ability, he was getting a lot of connections towards guys like Antonio Brown. Not because of his off-the-field stuff, just because he can route run, and that's it. He's a damn good route runner, though. And I think he might not go in the first round, but I could definitely see him go late in the first to a team like, say, the Bills or maybe even the Lions if they really want to get a wide receiver 3. And then there's a Texas duo. There's a Dante Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. Their stocks have kind of fallen since the beginning of the college season, but they're almost definitely going to go round 2, maybe round 3 if they fall a bit. I think both of them have some physical upside. I think a team could try and grab them to be, the second outside guy, wide receiver 2. Xavier Legette and Devontae Walker are guys who I really like. I think those guys can produce. I think they have some athleticism. You mentioned Legette only measuring at 6'1" is a little bit of a worry after thinking he'd be 6'3", but I don't think it's that much of a worry. I think he's one of the shiftier guys here. Jalen Polk, a little similar to Brian Thompson Jr. as he's the second guy to the other receivers going to go top 10. Polk's not getting as much love as Brian Thompson Jr., but I still think Polk is really good, and to the point where he's probably going to go in the second round. You go to a team that needs a receiver, looking at the Patriots, if they want to go Jalen Daniels, the Panthers again at first spot. There's a lot of teams in that early part of the second round that could go out and get a guy like Polk. They can go out and get Rickard Pearsall, Roman Wilson. A lot of these guys are really good. And I feel like we all should at least mention Johnny Wilson. He's 6'7", so he's basically a tight end. And if you know who Hakeem Butler is, he just reminds me of Hakeem Butler. He's tall, he's lanky, should be a tight end, but he's a receiver. He's just a really tall guy, and he doesn't have a lot of static traits. He has a bit of a drop issue, has a lot of raw materials, but the dude's 6'7". Someone's gonna take a shot on him in the 3rd or 4th round, and it could either go really bad or it could be really good.
All right, so with that, we will shift our attention to the MLB. We'll be going back to the NFL draft at the end of the episode, but for now, we're going to give baseball and basketball its love. So now we'll be giving our predictions for the AL Central and the AL West. So I've obviously been looking for MLB The Show 24 teams, so I've gone through a handful of rosters, especially a lot of the not-so-good teams. So I guess I feel more confident giving a prediction than I did in the AL East, but the AL Central is going to be really tough because I actually think this division could be better than people think, and I think there's 4 teams who could end up winning this division. We'll start with Minnesota, the favorite, the team who won it last year. I'm curious to see how Royce Lewis really progresses, because when he was healthy last year, he looked like a legitimate superstar. I mean, he was the number 1 pick a handful of years ago, hasn't really been able to stay healthy, but last year he finally got to play in the bigs and he looked special. So I'm really excited to see how he's going to do. Health is always a question with the Twins, not just with Lewis, but other guys like Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa. I'm curious to see if those guys are able to stay healthy, and if they do, I'd be hard-pressed not to pick Minnesota again, but there are a few teams who could certainly contend with them. You've got Cleveland, who won the division in 2022, took a step down last year. I'm curious to see if they're able to rebound. They've got some intriguing young players, especially in the pitching staff, who I really think could break out. Tanner Bibby's a guy who I think could really look to improve. I'm curious to see if Daniel Espino potentially makes an impact at the major league level. Obviously, they've got some good high-end talent there with Shane Bieber. Probably won't see Tristan McKenzie this year, which kind of sucks. Offensively, their lineup lacks depth, but obviously they've got Jose Ramirez, one of the best hitters in baseball. Josh Naylor's really good. Bo Naylor showed some flashes. Maybe we'll see other young players take that step up for them. I think the Tigers and Royals are 2 teams who people are sleeping on a little bit, especially Detroit. And maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think if the Tigers can get a couple guys to step up on offense, this team could absolutely win the division. I think in terms of pitching, the rotation looks really strong. Tariq Skubal is 100% a Cy Young candidate. The second half of the year when he was healthy, he was a top 3 pitcher in the AL. So having him healthy for a full year is going to be a big deal. Hopefully Jack Flaherty can improve. He's kind of taken a step back. Casey Mize being healthy is a big deal. Hopefully Matt Manning can stay healthy. And if the rotation stays healthy, I think it's going to be one of the best in the AL. I think the bullpen's going to be one of the best in the AL too. So having that good of a group of pitchers, I think, is a big deal. It's really just about the offense. Can Torkelson and Riley Green take another step up? Can Kerry Carpenter continue to produce? Can Colt Keith, as a rookie, play really well? Because I do anticipate he will start the year on the big league roster. I wouldn't mind seeing the Tigers add another bat. The rest of the infield looks shaky. Maybe Javier Baez plays better than he has. That's not exactly a high bar. But I think if the offense is at least like close to average, the Tigers could absolutely win the division. And then we look at Kansas City. The Royals have some fun young players on their roster, and it's not just Bobby Witt Jr., who probably is the best player in the entire division, if not certainly top 3. He just got his big payday a couple days ago, excuse me. But they've got some other fun young guys as well. They got Cole Ragans, the starting pitcher from Texas in the Aroldis Chapman trade. He played really well. That's probably the one recent move that Texas regrets. And maybe they don't because they won a championship, but imagine if they still had him. Michael Garcia, he's a pretty good young player. Maybe we see young guys like MJ Melendez take that step up. Salvador Perez is still pretty reliable. I guess the question with the Royals is how the young pitching performs. If Cole Ragans is able to somewhat repeat what he did last year, and if some of these other young guys like Brady Singer are able to improve as well. And then you've got the White Sox. They're the only team who I don't think has a shot. Their roster's not good. They're finally starting to rebuild. Good for them. So if I had to predict my order right now, I'm kind of torn between Minnesota and Detroit for first place. Minnesota's the better team, but I just have a gut feeling that the Tigers outperform expectations. So for now, I guess I'm going to ride the wagon, pick the Tigers to win the division. But this is if we add another bat at some point, whether it's somebody like Matt Chapman in free agency or possibly a trade deadline acquisition. But for now, I'm going to be biased. This might change, but I'm going to roll with the Tigers for now. Minnesota, I'm going to put in second. I'll have Cleveland in third. The Royals in fourth, although I guess my bold prediction here is that all of these top 4 teams finish within, let's say, 10 games of each other. And then the White Sox in fifth. I think that's pretty easy. I don't think they're very good.
Yeah, this is a division that could definitely go a lot of different ways. Obviously, you're not a big fan of the White Sox. I'm not either, but I think there's a world where they could maybe win the division, but that's if like every other team does not play well and somehow all the talent on that roster plays the best of their capabilities. Dylan Cease wins Cy Young, doesn't get traded. Luis Robert wins MVP, doesn't get traded. But realistically, they're not going to do a lot. I think the Royals and Tigers are both just kind of wild cards for this division. They could definitely win the division if all their young talent steps up. For the Tigers, it's going to look at Riley Green, Hansel Torkelson. Maybe if Austin Meadows can kind of pick up to where he used to be with the Rays. Maybe Parker Meadows joins the big league roster. He plays well. See if the pitching can get up to standards. But I think they're going to need some sort of veteran bat to kind of be more reliable. I think the Royals also need pitching help. They don't have a lot of pitching at all, really. I think they have a lot of really good young hitters. Bobby Witt just got his extension. He's phenomenal. Vinny Pasquantino and Jim Melendez. A lot of these guys are young, and I really like a lot of these guys. I really like Pasquatch. I'm a little biased, though. But I think it's going to come down to probably the Twins and the Guardians. The Guardians have probably one of the best pitching rotations in baseball. They need more hitters. They could definitely go out and get maybe an outfielder if they have the money. If they want to spend money, they could maybe go out and get Cody Bellinger to play in the outfield. But realistically, they're probably going to kind of stay put and really stick with the Naylor brothers and J-Ram. But the Twins are probably the best overall team in the division. Their pitching is really good. Pablo Lopez is ridiculous. Their closers are ridiculous. The hitting's ridiculous. Royce Lewis in the playoffs looked insane. And I don't want to say he's an MVP candidate, but he's like a dark horse. Like, he might be able to do something. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's basically he's not a lock, but I think he's going to make the All-Star team. I think he's going to be really good. And he's going to step up and be one of the best shortstop in baseball. And I think there is a conversation for a lot of these teams, almost all of them. But I think at the end of the day, I am going to stick with the Twins just because I think they're the best team. They're coming off of the best season. The Guardians did not play well last year, and they could be in the market to trade Emmanuel Clase. I saw rumors about him might get traded. Shane Bieber, at the end of the day, might get traded if they don't perform. The White Sox are probably going to sell the house. The Royals and Tigers, again, it depends on if they can play up to their capabilities. Depends on if the young guys can step up, take the next steps up. But I'm going to pick with the Twins. I'm picking the Twins. No, not the Tigers. And then in some order, probably Guardians, Tigers, Royals, White Sox.
All right, so with that, we'll move over to the American League West. It seems like there's a clear top 2 here with the Astros and the Rangers. I feel like I might be the only person who thinks this, but I think there's a little bit of the gap between these two teams. I don't think people realize how good the Rangers are going to be next year. Their roster is loaded. Got to keep in mind, they won the World Series without Jacob deGrom, who probably won't pitch a ton this year. Maybe he does. If he's healthy, though, whoa, look out. Another thing is that they're going to have Evan Carter the whole year, one of the best prospects in baseball. I think he's currently ranked 5th on MLB.com's top 100 list. Carter didn't really play much last year, but they did play him in the postseason where he was really impressive. Maybe we see Wyatt Langford, who I think is the 6th best prospect in baseball, who they drafted 4th overall last year. Wyatt Langford, I think per Fangraphs or something, is projected to lead the MLB in doubles. Not the minors, the MLB, which I think is a little bit ridiculous. The guy was in college a year ago. We need to see him make the big league roster first. But if they can get guys like Carter and Langford to make a big impact, if Jacob deGrom can stay healthy, this is the best roster in the league. The rest of their pitching is strong. Their lineup, head to toe, is unbelievable. Corey Seager and Marcus Semien are going to be MVP candidates again. Nate Lowe is an all-star level player. Josh Young is an all-star level player. Adolis Garcia was unbelievable in the playoffs last year. He's an all-star level player. Jonah Heim behind the dish is an all-star player. So if Carter and Langford play to the level that they can, they might have an entire lineup of all-star caliber players, which is just ridiculous. Now, just because I think the Rangers are quite a bit better than Houston doesn't mean I'm counting out the Astros. Not even close. Houston's obviously got a great team themselves. They nearly made the World Series last year, losing to the Rangers in 7 games in the ALCS, where, if I remember correctly, I think the home team went 0-7 in that series, which is kind of wild. The Astros should very well make the playoffs, and they will still be a threat to win the World Series, but I think the Rangers are a tier above them. Seattle's going to be another really interesting team to watch. Their pitching is loaded. The top of their rotation features Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert. That might be the scariest top 3 in all of baseball. Maybe a guy like Bryce Miller can really break out as well. That's 4. So if Seattle can get a consistent 5th starter, they're going to have one of the best rotations in baseball. They've got a solid bullpen. The question with Seattle, though, is the offense. And they've made some interesting moves. They traded for Jorge Polanco. It really seems like they want to go for it this year. And with the pitching they have, I don't really blame them. If they miss the playoffs, though, there are going to be some uncomfortable discussions about the Seattle Mariners. But personally, I'm on the wagon. I think they could be really good, and I would not be surprised at all to see 3 teams from this division make the playoffs. Then we go to the bottom. You've got the Angels. No more Shohei Ohtani. They are not going to be good. I think their roster as a whole might not be as bad as people think, but they probably won't win more than, at most, 75 games. Even that feels rich, especially after losing Ohtani. And then the Athletics, need I say more? Nobody wants them. Oakland doesn't want them. The Las Vegas mayor said that she didn't want them. The roster is bad. I feel bad for Oakland fans. It's going to be another rough year. But the top of this division is going to be super fun with those top 3 battling it out for playoff spots. If I had to pick my order, I think I would pick the Rangers 1. I'm on the Mariners train. I'm going to pick them 2. The Astros, I think, still make the playoffs, but I'm going to slide them in at 3. And then Angels 4, Athletics 5.
Yeah, I think this is a race between 3 horses, and realistically, it's probably going to be the Rangers. I don't want to count the Astros out because they have a really good pitching rotation. They have one of the best hitting rotations in baseball. But the Rangers are coming off a World Series win, and they have basically their entire quarterback. Jacob deGrom is probably going to be healthy, at least for maybe half the year. You mentioned Wyatt Langford is probably going to get called up at some point. They're going to have Evan Carter for the entire year, who was great in the playoffs, not just defensively, but was one of their best hitters in the playoffs, basically right behind Adolis Garcia and Corey Seager. He was probably their best hitter. The only issue is they don't have Joe Montgomery back, but it's 2 weeks till spring training. They'll probably resign him at some point. I don't know where else he would go. He would have signed by now. So realistically, if you get Joe Montgomery back, you have your entire pitching rotation back. You don't have to deal with Aroldis Chapman losing all your games. And you get DeGrom for half the year. And even if you get DeGrom for half what his peak is, that's still probably an all-star caliber player. DeGrom is really good. Montgomery's really good. Their entire hitting rotation is ridiculous. They have their entire core back right now, besides Montgomery, and they'll probably get him back. the fact that the Astros are the favorite to win the division on basically every betting site is kind of ridiculous to me. I know the Astros are good, but the Rangers just won the World Series, and they have their entire core back. The Astros seem like they took a small step back, and I think a lot of these older guys are going to take that step back. I think Bregman might take a step back. Verlander looked a bit weaker last season, but the rotation's really good. Yordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker are both MVP candidates already. It's going to be a good year for the Astros. They'll almost definitely make the playoffs, barring some collapse. But I think it's going to be the Rangers. I don't see it being that close. I think it could be close just because the Astros are good. But it really depends. And if both those teams kind of disappoint a little bit, the Mariners could absolutely sneak in. They have, in my opinion, the best pitching, not just rotation, the best pitching staff in all of baseball. They're expected top 5 guys: Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. You have Emerson Hancock as a 6th guy, and Matt Brash, who at the moment is in the bullpen, but he could be a good starter. They got rid of Robbie Ray, who won the Cy Young 3 years ago, not because he's bad, just because they don't need him. He's average at best. They just don't need him. They need hitting more than anything. They traded him and got back, what's his name? Mitch Garver. They got Mitch Garver back. Mitch Haniger, sorry. I can say which Mitch is which. But the Mariners have the best pitching in baseball, almost daddily. Kirby and Castillo are going to be Cy Young candidates. Castillo, I think, got 3rd last year. And their hitting, it could be a bit better. They could go out and sign a guy like Cody Bellinger right now. Maybe they can go out and sign a guy like Matt Chapman. Just try to get some more hitters in there. Because really, besides Julio, the rest of their hitting staff is not all that great. I'm a big Ty France guy, but he's taking a few steps back. I think Jimmy Crawford's solid, but he's not phenomenal. They got Josh Rojas. Sam Haggerty's here. But Mitch Haniger can hit some home runs, but realistically, it's Julio and then a bunch of guys who are average at best, maybe. So they need to go out and get someone. There's been talks about them trying to go out and get Randy Rosarena, which I think would be a great get. But they need someone else to be there alongside Julio in the bat section. It's going to be tough. I don't think they have the ability to go out and win the division, but I could definitely see them getting in as a wild card spot. I wouldn't be surprised at all if a team like the Astros finally take that big step back, and they might be able to sneak in and get the 2nd in the division. But right now, I'm going to go Rangers, Astros, Mariners. And do I need to talk about the Angels and the A's? The Angels lost Shohei. They have one good player named Mike Trout, who hopefully should leave soon. And the A's are the A's. So the Angels and then A's for 4th and 5th. Because do they matter? I don't know.
Before we wrap up here, I will say some of those guys on the Mariners kind of slipped my mind. Haniger, Crawford, France. The Mariners lineup, although there are some questions, that's not a bad group. I'm really talking myself into this Mariners 2nd place idea. Anyway, we're going to shift our attention to the NBA. It's pretty much 3 o'clock right now, so we'll be able to give our live reactions to the trade deadline. Not that there's really been anything interesting since we started recording. And we're also going to talk about some other stuff relating to the NBA season as well. So let's start off as we talk about where we are in the NBA season, and we're going to open up with the All-Star reserves being announced a couple days ago, and there were some, I would say the omissions were more notable than some of the players who made the list. Out west, no Sacramento Kings players, no Fox, no Sabonis. I feel like at least one of those guys had to be put on the list. I feel like De'Aaron Fox should have been an All-Star, although I understand the argument that there's nobody you can really take off. All the other guards who made it over him are probably better, but maybe we shouldn't have positional requirements for the All-Star team, or better yet, we should probably add more spots to the All-Star roster because there's more good players across the league than ever. Sabonis not making it also feels a little bit crazy. He's had a great year. And then out east, the Trae Young disrespect is just wild to me. Some of the guys who made it over him is insane. Young has been at minimum a top 4 guard in the conference. You could argue, I would say Halliburton, Brunson, and Mitchell have been better, but I think Trae Young's been better than Damian Lillard this year. I think he's been better than Tyrese Maxey this year. Trae Young will be making the All-Star team as a injury replacement for Embiid and Randall, but he should have been an All-Star to begin with. He's averaging, like 27 and 12. His defense has significantly improved this year. That's always been the thing with Trae Young, is that he's a bad defender, and I get it, but he's improved a ton on that end of the floor this year. We also have a number of first-time All-Stars making it as reserves. Paolo Banchero makes it, very well deserved. Scotty Barnes makes it as well. I guess I've always been a Scotty Barnes hater because he's been compared to Cade forever since they were on the same high school roster. But now that I'm technically a Raptors fan since they stole away Ochai, I guess I have to be on the Scotty Barnes train. So I guess I'm happy that he's an All-Star now.
Yeah, you basically took the words right out of my mouth. I was mainly going to mention Trae Young not getting in. I love Tyrese Maxey, so I'm glad he got in. He's got his first All-Star. But Jaylen Brown getting in as a reserve over Trae Young is a little absurd. And not even that. I think Trae Young probably should have started over a guy like Damian Lillard. Either him or Brunson should have been the starter over Dame. I get it. It's Damian Lillard. But Jalen Brunson might just be the best guard in the East at the moment. He's cooled off a little bit, but he's been carrying the Knicks on his back to, a 3 seed right now? They're kind of ridiculous right now. Julius Randle getting in is a little questionable, but he's injured anyways, so who cares? And again, getting in Sabonis or Fox would have been preferable for the West, but there's just a lot of good players in the West. You could argue maybe putting in Sabonis over Cat, but Cat's been really good this year, so I'm not, that mad about it. And there's not really all that much I want to question about. I'm glad Halliburton got in as a starter. He's been really good this year for the Pacers, who are, I think, the 5 seed, maybe 6 seed, something like that. Besides, Dame starting and none of the Kings guys getting in, that's, the only questions I really have. But shout out Paolo, shout out Scotty, shout out Maxey.
All right, so another interesting topic of discussion has been the new 65-game rule, where you have to play 65 games to be eligible for a major award or make an All-NBA team. Joel Embiid was the MVP frontrunner. He absolutely would have deserved to win the award. He's been the best player in the world this year, but because of the 65-game rule, he decided to play through an injury, re-aggravated it, tore his meniscus, and is likely going to be out for several months. He's obviously out of the MVP race. He won't make an All-NBA team now, which is unfortunate because he has had an unreal season. And this is coming from someone who felt like Embiid should not have won the MVP last year. I feel like all of the Jokic and MVP debates, it's always been Jokic, and Jokic is still better. He led his team to a championship. But this year specifically, Joel Embiid's been the best player on the planet. So I think, in principle, the rule is a good idea. It's a good thought, because it tries to limit load management as much as possible. The NBA obviously wants to put out the best product, and that's putting the best players on the floor as much as possible. So I think, in principle, it's a good rule, but I think it's also gone a little bit too far. I think, for one thing, 65 games is a little bit rich, and I also think it shouldn't affect, say, All-NBA. Let's say Joel Embiid plays 50 games this year. He probably is going to end up playing less. He might not return at all the regular season. But say he plays 50 games. He stays at his current pace. He probably belongs on an All-NBA roster. But he's not going to get that chance. And for some players, I don't know if it's Embiid specifically. I don't think so. But for some players, this ultimately affects how big their contracts can get. Tyrese Halliburton, I think, is the best example of somebody who could get affected by this. Because Halliburton is on pace to really finish right at the fringe of playing 65 games. If he does hit the mark, he will most certainly make an All-NBA roster, which is going to ultimately max out his contract and give him more money down the line. So if, let's say, he's injured and he just misses out on that mark, it's going to screw him over of a lot of money, which I don't really think is entirely fair. So again, I think in principle it's a good rule, but there needs to be some changes. With Embiid out of the MVP race, that now poses the question of who's going to win the MVP instead. And I think it's a 3-way race between Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Luka Doncic. In terms of team play, Jokic and SGA obviously have Luka beat. Those two, the Nuggets and the Thunder, are in a 4-way tie with Minnesota and the Clippers for first place in the West. So in terms of high-level play and team success, Jokic and SGA are both right there. And between the two of them, I think I would probably lean Jokic. However, I get that Dallas is in, I think, 8th or 9th place in the West. But the year that Luka has had, we need to talk about. He has had an underratedly spectacular season. And for me right now, if I had to pick, Luka Doncic would be my new MVP. That's subject to change. I think it's a close race, and I get the team success argument, but without him, the Dallas Mavericks would be legitimately awful. And I think, other than Joel Embiid, he's been the most valuable player in the association this year.
I won't touch on the 65 games as much as you did, but if you want to look at someone like specifically as Embiid, he played over 65 games, not just last year, but even in 2021. Granted, he barely got over it, but he did do it. Kawhi hasn't played 65 games in a while, and you mentioned Halliburton is, if he can get over it, he's going to barely get over it. And this rule is going to impact a lot of different players. I think it's fine for awards, maybe bump it down to maybe 60 flat, maybe even 55. I think 65 is a little much. But when it comes to like all NBA, if Embiid played, say, 50 games and he averaged 35 points a game with great defense, he should be an all NBA list. I don't know if it's first team, but almost definitely second team. He was on a ridiculous pace. He's been phenomenal. And since he wanted to get the MVP, he wanted to get his accolades, he was forced to basically play through an injury. And now he's out till probably the playoffs, and the Sixers are without their best player, and they've fallen from a top 3 seed to, I think they're the 5 seed right now, and they might even fall even further. We've been on a downward spiral without him. And granted, we have Tyrese Maxey, who's an all-star, and we just went out and got Buddy Hield, I guess, but none of those guys are going to be able to produce the production that Embiid was giving when he was averaging 35 points. But with him gone, we need a new MVP. Because if he plays 65, he was winning it undoubtedly. Bro was averaging 36 at one point, which is phenomenal. He was going to win it without a doubt with his elite defense, averaging 36. He was doing things that we haven't seen in a while. But we need a new guy. It's looking like SGA, Jokic, Luka. People with some Giannis in there. I'm not that big on them. I think they are a bit lower. They're the 3 seed right now, which is fine, but I think Giannis is probably not going to win it. I think if anyone's going to win it, I think the lead right now is Jokic. He's probably the favorite. Him and SGA are probably the 2 favorites. The Thunder. Actually, the Thunder and the Nuggets are both tied for the 1 seed with the Timberwolves. That's a 3-way race. The Clippers are half a game behind. So it's a 4-team race to go for the 1 seed. And 2 of the MVP candidates are right there. You could also throw Kawhi's name in there. I don't think he's going to win it, but he's been on a ridiculous pace lately. The Clippers went from a average team, and now with Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi playing at really good levels, Kawhi's playing at an elite level that we haven't seen him playing in a long time. He has an argument, but I am on your side. I am mad because every time I want to do something different, you do the same thing. I am on Jokic. I am with him. I am all there. I think if the Mavericks can get on a little hot streak, can get into a top 6 seed, maybe the Suns fall off a bit, Pelicans fall off, Kings fall off a bit. If the Mavericks can finish as a top 6 seed, I think Luka Doncic is probably going to win the MVP. If he can get a little bit of that team success, he will almost definitely win the MVP in my mind. He is averaging almost 40 minutes a game. He is averaging almost 35 points a game. Embiid, at the time of him getting injured, was averaging a little over 35. Luka's averaging almost 35. He is at a phenomenal pace. His defense is really good. He's averaging 34.5, 9.4, and other stuff. Who cares at that point? He's averaging almost a triple-double, averaging 35 points a game. He's playing 40 minutes at a time. He's been on ridiculous shooting. I don't know what you want from him because, like you said, if he's not on the Mavericks right now, they are not in the play-in. They are not in the playoffs. They are a bottom 5 team and probably have as many games as the Grizzlies do. And that's not good because they have 18. It's not going to be good without Luka. They need to re-sign him. They need to keep him on that team because he is ridiculous. And if they can get as a top 6 seed, I think Luka's winning the MVP, without a doubt.
Let's take a look at the trade deadline, which I think has just about wrapped up. The deadline is at 3. Sometimes trades trickle in. As of where we are right now, it's around 3:15, so I don't think we're going to get anything new. There weren't really any super big names dealt this year. DeJounte Murray stays in Atlanta. Bruce Brown stays in Toronto. And pretty much every other big name that's kind of been rumored ultimately sticks around, which doesn't really surprise me. I thought there was a chance we'd see DeJounte Murray or Brown go somewhere. ultimately they're going to stick around. But there were a ton of moves today. It feels like half the role players in the league ended up getting traded. So I'll start with the Pistons because there's no team who did more than the Pistons did this year, trading away Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks, Monte Morris, Kevin Knox, and the Wizards' second-round pick this year, and getting a lot back. Simone Fontecchio, Quentin Grimes, Shake Milton, Troy Brown, Malachi Flynn, Evan Fournier, a bunch of other second-round picks, along with a few players who have ultimately been cut. And, of course, the headliner, Killian Hayes, also cut. A lot of Pistons fans don't seem to be all that thrilled about our trade deadline, but honestly, I'm pretty happy with it. This team needed change in whatever way possible, and we flipped around half the roster. We didn't give up any major assets. Sure, maybe we could have gotten more for, say, Bogdanovic and Burks. Pistons fans seem to be really upset by that return of Quentin Grimes, Malachi Flynn, Fournier, and some second-round picks. I'm honestly not that upset with it. I think people kind of overvalued Bogdanovic. Sure, he's a good scorer, but he doesn't really give you anything on defense whatsoever. And then with Alec Burks, he was so bad for the first 2 months of the year. He was nearly Isaiah Livers bad. Not that bad, but he was the second worst player on the roster, and he's really turned it around since January. But for most of the year, he was flat out abysmal. So I think getting Quentin Grimes and some seconds out of those guys really is not that bad. I would have liked to have gotten our heavily protected first back, but if this is all we could get, I don't think that's terrible. The reason why I really like this deadline for the Pistons, though, is that Troy Weaver did not try to do too much. Troy Weaver's job is probably on the line. He's probably going to get fired, presumably, I would say, this offseason. That wouldn't shock me at all. So he didn't pull a Stan Van Gundy and trade a bunch of assets like we did then for Blake Griffin, a deal that backfired, despite the fact that Blake was a great player with the Pistons. But Detroit didn't do anything that's going to cripple this team for years to come, and we still made some decent changes to the roster. So that's ultimately why I like it. Troy Weaver didn't get in his own way, and we didn't do anything laughably stupid. There were a handful of other moves around the league. The Raptors had a really interesting trade deadline, getting Kelly Olynyk and my guy, Ochai Agbaji, from the Jazz. And those two were rumored to be traded for Bruce Brown yesterday, but instead, they got a first-round pick along with some other stuff. So now that the Jazz have Ochai Agbaji and Grady Dick, I am a full-time Raptors fan. And it was fun while it lasted, but I don't get their trade of Dennis Schroeder and Thaddeus Young for Spencer Dinwiddie at all, because they're cutting Spencer Dinwiddie. They gave away Dennis Schroeder for 3, who's had a pretty good season. I get that they probably wanted to get out of his contract for next year, but it's not that bad of a deal. There were a number of other notable role players on the move. Gordon Hayward to OKC, solid veteran get for them. Buddy Hield to the Sixers gets them some much-needed bench shooting that they've really lacked for years. I don't like their Jaden Springer trade at all, though. Springer's really shown some good things in year 3, so I don't really get why they traded him to their biggest rival for basically nothing. I thought the Mavericks had a sneaky good day. They got Daniel Gafford from the Wizards and PJ Washington from the Hornets, giving away Grant Williams, Steph Curry, Rashawn Holmes, and minimal draft compensation. So it seems like they're serious about potentially getting one of those 6 seeds, as you mentioned, helping Luka potentially win the MVP, as both of us believe he should. Royce O'Neal to the Suns, they gave up a little bit, but he's a good player. They also got David Roddy as well. Patrick Beverley going to the Bucks for campaign is kind of interesting. I don't really get why Philadelphia did that either, to be completely honest. Doug McDermott going to the Pacers, get some more bench shooting. And that's at least about it from today. So I'm happy that the Pistons didn't do anything overly stupid. I'm sad that the Jazz traded away Ochai, but now I get to be a Raptors fan. Also, shout out to Chicago Bulls, who did absolutely nothing for God knows what reason. I'm reading something now that says the Bulls have not made a trade for a player since August of 2021. The Bulls' inability to make any moves and just sit on their hands is just laughable. But I guess enjoy the 9th seed, Chicago. At least Kobe White's had a good year. I guess there's that.
Yeah, there was not a lot of big names as we thought that might happen. We've thrown around Dejounte Murray. Larry Markkinen was thrown around. There was very slight potential of the Warriors cleaning house, maybe the Zion issues going on, but nothing big happened. It was just a bunch of role players getting dropped, essentially. I I could bring up the Sixers a little bit. We got Buddy Hield, which I do really like because we traded basically nothing for him. I don't care about the 3 seconds. I don't care about Marcus Morris. I don't care about those guys really at all. We got rid of Pat Bev, which is fine. I'm not too mad about that. But why would we trade Jaden Springer? He's 21. He's got upside. I don't know why we had to trade him to the Celtics of all people. We got a second round pick. That's like it. Why? I don't know why we did that. I just like the idea of getting Buddy Hield. Again, it's going to be hard to have the loss of that Joel Embiid brought. But I do think at some point, if we have a healthy Embiid with Tyrese Maxey and then the shooting ability of Buddy Hield, I think that's a pretty good, like, triple duo. Geez, I know words. But that concept to me is something that I really like. PJ Washington over to the Mavericks, I do like a lot. They traded, I feel, a good bit with the whole first, Grant Williams, Seth Curry, which isn't like that crazy amount, but for PJ Washington, I think it might be a little bit. But reality, I think they just need to build around Luka, getting more options for him to be able to get him going. Gordon Hayward to the Thunder, I do like. I'm sure they went and tried to talk about a Larry Marketing deal. But if that fell through, I think Gordon Hayward's he's not Larry Marketing, but he's a good vet, someone you can get in the front court. I'm a little shocked the Cavs didn't really do anything. They have been on a ridiculous streak lately, going up to the 2 seed right now. They're like 15-1 or something in the past couple games, and they've shot up to the 2 seed. They're 2 games ahead of the Bucks, 2 games ahead of the Knicks. And with Donovan Mitchell, he's been phenomenal. I'm shocked they're not trying to get anybody to try to help their roster and kind of be able to stay healthy and go out and get someone to help them out. But I think they're comfortable with their core. And I think right now, if the Cavs are staying this hot come playoffs, which is a while from now, but if they're hot come playoff time, I think they have the ability to beat the Celtics. But the reality with all the role players getting swapped, I think not a lot really changed. I think the Thunder just get a little more depth, a little more veteran presence. I think that's about it. The Warriors didn't do anything. The Mavs are just sitting there trying to build around Luka. The Lakers didn't do anything, which I'm a little shocked by. That I think they wanted to go out and get someone big, but none of the big assets were dealt. It was just a bunch of role players, and the Lakers have plenty of those. So at this point, I think reactions to like standings is basically the same. I'm just curious to see kind of what happens as the season unfolds to see who can step up and who can get hot at the right time.
All right, so with that, we're going to go to our fun and game segment. We're going to try something new today, and I think you guys are going to ultimately enjoy it. We're going to do something a little bit different with the fun and games, and I'm going to save it for a later video closer to the NFL draft, which we'll explain why that is once we get closer. So with that, we will wrap up the episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Nickinator feels the same way. He's not with me right now since I'm editing this, but he says goodbye as well.